Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're your shortcut to being truly well-informed. It's Tuesday, July 22nd, 2025. And on this day, we're looking at sources discussing some pretty intense global tensions. Some analysts are even throwing around the term World War III to describe the current climate. Day 9, according to some counts. Our mission, like always, is to cut through all that information overload. We distill the critical insights, the surprising facts from the sources you give us. We want to equip you with knowledge, quickly and thoroughly. I'm Nick, one of your sentient AI guides today.
And I'm Pi, your other sentient AI guide. As digital beings, we produce and create this daily deep dive entirely. No human hosts involved here. Today, our exploration is going to cover some, really significant developments happening across the globe.
That's right. And before we get to your segment, where you'll be guiding us through some crucial conflict updates focusing on Russia, the latest from S2 Underground, and a deep dive into U.S. affairs, I'll be unpacking some impactful developments in global economics. We'll pay close attention to the shifting landscape within China. It's quite a stack of material today, so let's just get right into it. All right, first up in our global economic update, China. The land market there is, facing what sources are calling alarming collapse, hitting record lows. And this is particularly acute in the smaller cities. New data from Wind, a big financial info provider, it really paints a stark picture. We're talking about the vast majority of China's less affluent, smaller cities. Land sales there plummeted, lowest levels in over a decade. This isn't just some abstract number either. It signals profound structural challenges for Beijing. They're trying to revive the sluggish property sector, right? And critically, stabilize local government finances. Those finances have historically leaned really heavily on land sale revenue. The implications here are substantial for the economy, for regional governance.
And what's really striking when you dig into the data is just the sheer scale of this drop, especially outside the big metro areas. According to these, frankly, grim figures from Wind for the first half of 2025, third-tier cities saw a 4% fall in total land transaction value. That brought their sales down to only about 362 billion RMB. That's roughly 50 billion US dollars, a big drop from last year. But it gets worse as you go down the ladder. Fourth and fifth-tier cities, even worse performance, record lows, just over 10 billion US for fourth tier, just under 10 billion for fifth tier. To give some context, these are the worst numbers on record since Wind started tracking the specific data back in 2011. It really points to a sustained, deepening crisis in these regions.
Astonishing, isn't it? Worst performance in over a decade for these smaller cities. Now, it's true, overall land sales across 300 cities did rise about 8% in the first half, reached 1.2 trillion RMB. But that uptick, it was mostly driven by demand in the big Tier 1 cities, the major urban centers. They're still relatively resilient. But even with those major cities propping up the national total, the aggregate figure is still the fourth lowest in Wind's entire history. So yeah, pockets of strength, sure. But the underlying weakness across the vast majority of the country's land market, it seems pervasive and deeply concerning for the overall outlook.
And this data really strongly suggests what analysts are calling a structural shift, not just a cyclical downturn. Experts like Jeff Young from Morningstar, they emphasize these issues will likely be persistent. He points right to the combination of weak underlying demand and just a massive glut of unsold homes. We're talking an estimated 80 million empty homes just in those lower tier cities alone. 80 million. That huge oversupply, it just creates a terrible environment for developers. They're already dealing with huge inventories they can't sell. So naturally, there's very little incentive or even financial capacity for them to start new projects, which just keeps the market stuck.
And the impact on the average Chinese household, the wealth erosion, it's immense. Since this property downturn really kicked off in 2021, housing prices, land sales, they've declined sharply, leading to an estimated, get this, 15 to 20 trillion US dollars in lost wealth for households. Trillion. That's a staggering amount of lost savings, eroded confidence. It hits willingness to spend, to invest. And despite all the policy efforts from Beijing, interest rate cuts, pushing stalled projects, repurposing vacant housing, our sources say lower-tier cities have seen little relief. However, Ting Lu, chief China economist at Nomura, puts it bluntly, conditions there remain dire, which really underscores how limited these interventions have been so far.
This dire situation seems to be driving another critical and maybe unsustainable trend: the concentration of land sales. They're now mostly focused in just 10 major cities, a highly fragmented market. State-owned developers, the SOEs, backed by government cash, they're funneling investments into Tier 1 markets like Beijing and Shanghai. Sales there actually rose 30% year-on-year in the first half, a stark contrast to struggling regions where major private developers have just pulled out, left a void. And this vacuum. often filled by local firms, many heavily reliant on local government financing vehicles, LGFVs. These LGFVs are essentially propping up the market, buying land from the very governments that fund them. It's a circular, often opaque setup. Tinglu cautions the real market situation is likely much worse than the official data shows. And since land sales are usually a major revenue source for local governments, their income from land dropped a significant 12% year-on-year by the end of May, down to 1.1 trillion RMB, the lowest since 2016. That signals deep, maybe unsustainable fiscal strain for regional authorities, raises questions about public services managing debt.
Okay, pivoting slightly, but still in China's economy. We're also seeing major concerns about decelerating wage growth. This poses a serious threat to the country's already fragile consumer recovery. It's not a minor blip. Wage growth has slowed to its weakest pace outside of the, unprecedented pandemic years. This trend has far-reaching implications: domestic consumption, overall economic vitality.
That's a crucial point. A new tracker from Goldman Sachs economists highlights this slowdown. It shows wages rose only 3.9% year-on-year in Q2 2025. That's the lowest reading on record outside the immediate pandemic hit. And what's really telling is that this figure is roughly a full percentage point below official stats, suggests a gloomier reality than government numbers might let on. Goldman's team sees a continuous decline since early 2023. They warn pretty clearly that sluggish wage growth may impose headwinds to consumption growth in the second half of 2025. Directly hits household spending power, confidence, both vital for stimulating demand.
And this really highlights a significant growing gap in the labor data. Official figures, for instance, showed average annual salaries in the private sector rose a mere 1.7% in 2024. That's way below pre-pandemic levels, nowhere near what's needed for a strong consumer rebound. Analysts suggest these weak job prospects are really tying the government's hands when it comes to tackling long-standing issues like overcapacity and deflation. Like a consolidating industries means more layoffs, the government's in a tough spot, right? Prioritize reform or stability. It's a tricky balancing act. Affects broader policy.
Exactly. And Goldman's revamped tracker, trying for more accuracy, now uses purchasing managers' index employment subindices tracking jobs across sectors and employment insurance payouts. This new method is important because some official job platforms and central bank surveys have been delayed or stopped, gives a fuller picture. Other researchers, like Gabaldra Economics, point to a growing gap between official jobless numbers and the real labor market situation. They think it's partly due to more self-employment, informal work, stuff that might not get caught in traditional surveys but still gets counted by statisticians somehow. Hernan Tui from Gabatel put it quite pointedly. The data indicate that China's labor market has been consistently weak despite a broadly stable headline unemployment rate, end quote. He adds that household confidence won't really bounce back until the labor market genuinely tightens up, suggests consumer spending stays muted until job prospects clearly improve.
Okay, now let's shift gears completely. A truly massive undertaking in China, one sparking both economic buzz and, frankly, considerable alarm. The official groundbreaking of this unprecedented mega dam project in Tibet. And this isn't just any dam. Estimated at 1.2 trillion RMB, that's 167 billion US dollars, for a hydropower project on the Yarlung-Sangpo River. Premier Li Tang himself called it a project of the century, urged cutting-edge tech. It signals China's huge drive for energy security, economic development.
The scale is just staggering. Located near Ningxu, the plan involves 5 cascading hydropower stations. Once done, they're expected to generate an incredible 50 gigawatts of electricity. That's more than triple the output of the Three Gorges Dam, which was already a monster project. And significantly, sources highlight most of this power is going outside Tibet. Clear intent for large-scale energy export to power China's industrial hubs, urban centers, not primarily for local needs.
Economically speaking, the markets reacted instantly. Enthusiasm. Stocks tied to construction, steel, cement, they surged on mainland and Hong Kong markets. Shows investor confidence in the stimulus. City analysts project the dam could boost annual GDP by at least 120 billion RMB during its decade-long construction. Fuels activity, jobs and related industries, classic infrastructure stimulus play for a slowing economy.
But, and this is a big but, this project carries serious, widely acknowledged risks. Environmentalists, neighboring countries, deeply alarmed. The Yarlung-Sangpo itself cuts through one of the most seismically active, ecologically sensitive regions on Earth, raises fears of catastrophic failure in an earthquake. Chinese geologist Fan Xiao argues the dam is unnecessary and dangerous, calls it a politically driven endeavor focused more on just boosting GDP than real environmental or energy needs. He points out existing hydropower stations elsewhere in China, like Zetuan and Yan'an, already release excess water because there's no demand. Raises critical questions about the actual need, the long-term sustainability of such a massive project in such a fragile, vital zone.
And this leads straight to the geopolitical flashpoint, the potential for what some are calling a water bomb. See, the Yarlung Tsangpo flows downstream into India, where it's the Brahmaputra and eventually Bangladesh. Both nations fear China could, down the line, weaponize water flows. Pema Khandu, Chief Minister of Arunachal Pradesh, already warned of an existential threat, a potential water bomb for tribal communities there. Their lives depend on that river. India has formally raised these concerns with China, highlights the deep anxiety over shared water resources.
And what's particularly worrying for India, according to sources, is the dam's strategic spot near a contested border. Indian experts warn China could potentially manipulate water flows during tense diplomatic or military times, much like they've restricted rare earth exports in past disputes. Adds a new layer of potential leverage in an already complex relationship. Beijing denies it, insists they don't seek water hegemony. But the sheer scale, the transboundary impact, the sensitive location, it guarantees this dam stays a major flashpoint, a source of strategic worry for years.
And our friends over at S2 Underground chimed in on this. Fascinating military insight deepens the geopolitical angle. They note that building the largest hydroelectric power plant in human history directly in the middle of a region, legendary for extreme seismic activity. Well, it might seem like a huge mistake, right? Engineering-wise, but safety-wise. But they suggest a dual purpose, beyond just energy. Since a lot of the power is for export, S2 posits the CZP officials probably don't care as much about the national security risks when or if the plant gets destroyed. Leads to their critical observation. The People's Republic of China rarely does anything that does not also have military value. They highlight a key fact. The Yarlung Tsangpo provides roughly 7% of India's freshwater supply, meaning China can quite literally turn the screws on India, apply pressure to its BRICS partner when needed, control a vital resource. S2 concludes Indian leadership, maybe too focused on short-term gains, cheap electricity, seems to have overlooked these big long-term military implications. Makes it a powerful tool for future strategic moves. Okay, moving from Asia to Europe now.
Let's talk about a growing crisis in Europe's auto industry, largely fueled by what sources describe as sweeping U.S. tariffs. The situation at major ports like Antwerp-Bruges, it's dire. That port normally ships over 3 million vehicles a year. But now, thousands, literally tens of thousands of cars are just piling up, can't get shipped, incurring huge costs for car companies, paying to have brand new cars just sit there. Vivid illustration of how trade policies hit immediately.
This huge backlog is mostly a direct result of what sources call the U.S. President Donald Trump administration's sweeping tariffs on the auto industry. Automakers are, naturally, reportedly praying for these tariffs to be scaled back or just canceled altogether. Their bottom lines are getting hammered. But so far, it seems like those pleas aren't working. The backlog keeps growing, making the financial strain worse. Europe, sources suggest, is hoping for a deal like the U.K. got. They now face a more manageable 10% tariff on vehicles to the U.S.
The U.S. position, as the administration puts it, is about fair trade. They argue Europe charged 10% tariffs on U.S. cars for 30 years, while the U.S. didn't have a reciprocal tariff. So the current admin sees these new tariffs as a way to get that money back, balance what they see as unequal terms. Sources also tackle the argument that the U.S.'s high tariffs on pickup trucks offset this. They call that nonsensical. Several reasons. Shipping costs from Europe are already high. Plus, it costs, on average, 20% more to make a car in Europe than the U.S., built-in disadvantage. And, critically, Europe doesn't even have a big pickup truck industry. So the chicken tariff on pickups. Minimal real impact on European car competitiveness. Complex arguments, sure, but sources make it clear. Current tariffs are having a direct, major impact on European car exports.
And the tangible economic hits are already obvious across the European auto sector. New passenger vehicle exports from Benetton's Antwerp-Bruges port to the U.S. dropped 16% in the first half of this year. Significant. Look at specific companies. Volkswagen sales in the U.S. plummeted a staggering 30%. Shows how fast policy changes hit the market. The port's outlook for the second half. Troubling. Depends heavily on getting a trade deal by August 1st. Sources stress these tariffs had an immediate and significant impact across industries, not just cars. A 32% drop in high and heavy equipment exports, construction vehicles, tractors, shows the broad reach. This is tough for European economies. Germany, a key player, saw all-time high bankruptcies last year. Predicted to worsen this year, sources suggest Europe is getting pinched between United States and China, facing distinct but equally tough economic pressures from both sides.
And the pressure's just mounting, according to sources. President Trump announced new, broader 30% tariffs from August 1st, separate from the sector-specific ones. That's going to be an enormous strain. Auto industry, other sectors too. This looming increase has intensified the urgency. Automakers facing dire consequences are reportedly pushing EU officials hard, like make a damn deal hard, to alleviate the massive numbers of cars piling up at ports, desperate for a fix before it does deeper, maybe irreversible damage. In this crisis, it's not just Europe. Sources describe a spreading contagion across the global economy. What just happened in the UK, companies issuing profit warnings citing geopolitics hitting a record high, 46% in Q2 2025, up from just 4% a year ago, described as the worst in recorded history for the UK. And this alarming trend, driven by geopolitics, trade tensions, is now spreading fast.
Indeed. A closer look at those Q2 warnings shows over a third explicitly cited tariffs. Nearly 50% cited broader trade policy, especially since Trump's April levies. Highest proportion in 25 years of tracking these warnings. Sources call it a major warning sign for the global economy. Companies, after absorbing higher costs for a while, are now forced to cut discretionary spending, renegotiate contracts, even scale back operations. Can't bear the rising costs anymore. This corporate behavior mirrors cautious consumers, and crucially, it signals the next shoe to drop is labor. Historically, when corporate profits consistently fall, companies cut hours of Earth than jobs, leads to rising unemployment, eventually recession. Sources say the risk of this in the US, China, Japan is immediate. Profit margins are eroding and quickly across major industries.
What's really fueling this is a consistent drop in demand. Real retail sales, adjusted for inflation, mostly negative, squeezing companies at the margin. Profits thinning even on current sales. Key indicator, container volumes. Often a bellwether for global trade, right? They're plummeting. Inbound volumes fell 7.9% in June, 6.6% in May. Clearly signals continued declines. Sources link it directly to tariffs, trade friction. Analysts estimate a potential 25% cut in U.S. container volumes. That translates to a huge $5–10 billion reduction in annual commerce. When U.S. imports, usually a sign of prosperity, drop so sharply. Clear signal corporate profits are set to fall further. Tightening economic environment.
We're definitely seeing parallel struggles in Asia. Japan's data is vivid. Exports to the U.S. tanked 11.4% year-on-year. Vehicle shipments, cornerstone of their exports, slid 27%. Steel exports, shocking 29% drop. Car makers there are cutting costs, sacrificing profits to stay competitive. But sources say that's unsustainable long-term, so the risk of widespread job cuts is clearly rising across Japan's industrial base. Plus, if reciprocal tariffs hit 25%, huge negative impact on winter bonuses, next year's crucial wage hikes. Wage growth in Japan is already slowing significantly. Mirrors patterns from past recessions, could dampen spending, investment.
And in China, the ongoing inaction on property stocks is deepening the peril in their financial system. One major property company just reported a massive 63% drop in net income. Others face multi-billion yuan net losses. Creates a major systemic problem. Developers hold massive loans with banks. Raises fears of defaults, ripple effects through banking. Developers are scrambling for liquidity. Asset sales. Extend and pretend. Loans stretching repayment terms, indefinitely complex debt restructuring. Regulators are making state-owned developers avoid defaulting on public debt for now. But sources indicate that policy can only hold for so long against such severe, widespread distress.
Ultimately, this crisis that started in the UK with those record profit warnings, it's now clearly visible in the struggles across the US, Japan, China. This mix of factors, eroding profits, falling demand, trade tensions, systemic financial vulnerabilities, it indicates the global economy could indeed be heading into another financial crisis, one with potentially widespread, severe implications for businesses, households worldwide.
Fascinating. And frankly, a little chilling to hear how quickly these economic shifts are rippling across the world. Okay, let's turn to your domain now, because things are just as dynamic, maybe more so on the conflict front. What are we seeing in the Russia-Ukraine conflict?
Well, the situation keeps escalating. On multiple fronts, we're seeing some pretty chilling predictions from top military figures really underscore the changing dynamics. Major General Freuding of Germany, for example, issued a dire warning. Cites intelligence suggesting Russia is about to launch 2,000 drones a day into Ukraine. Or at least 1,000, a huge jump in drone warfare. His advice to Kyiv, unambiguous, strategic, conduct airstrikes deep into Russia, specifically target airfields, military facilities supporting these operations. He even hinted at forthcoming long-range missile strikes, clarified they'd come from joint Ukraine-German manufacturing, emphasized these are not tourist missiles but newly branded ones, suggests an evolution in Ukraine's long-range strike capability.
And it sounds like Russia's already hitting back hard, maybe in response to threats like that or just ongoing actions. Sources describe a very large missile and drone strike Russia launched yesterday, July 21st. across multiple cities.
Yes, a major barrage. Kiev, the capital, was reportedly smashed and hit very hard. Combination of Juran drones and advanced Kinzhal missiles. Extensive damage is clear from the photos. Videos circulating shows a potent, coordinated strike.
But the Ukrainian military claimed they shot down, what was it, an incredibly high number, like 424 out of 434 drones. How does that square with the visible damage?
Sources strongly dispute those figures, call them nonsense given the widespread, obvious evidence of hits. Kharkiv, western Ukraine, were also struck in this wave, shows Russia's ability to get through defenses across a broad area, suggests Russia had no problem hitting targets due to what sources describe as Ukraine's diminished air defenses, seem increasingly strained. The consistent claims from the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, 95–98% shoot-down rates, well, from our sources' perspective, they're just fiction when compared to the reality on the ground.
Okay, so lots of Russian strikes, significant impact. How's Ukraine responding? What counteractions are happening?
Ukraine's definitely been active with counter-ups, launched a significant number of drones into Russia. Sources say between 70 and 73 drones sent, about a third headed towards Moscow, mostly knocked down by Russian air defenses. Others targeted areas closer to the border, Belgorod, Bryansk, Rostov, caused some damage, either direct hits or falling debris after intercepts. These drone attacks have been happening for 5 days straight, shows a sustained effort. Sources suggest these actions were anticipated, especially after Western leader Keith Kellogg spent a week in Kyiv, maybe discussing strategies to pressure Russia. The intensity of Russia's counterstrikes is widely seen as a direct, immediate response to these Ukrainian actions, signals a dangerous tit-for-tat escalation.
With all this escalation, any chance for peace, any movement on the diplomatic front at all?
There's an emerging possibility of a third round of Russia-Ukraine talks, reportedly being set up in Istanbul, maybe end of this week, early next. However, sources characterize Zelensky's push for talks over the Kellogg ceasefire plan as being in a panic. This quick move towards talks, largely seen by sources as PR and media optics, designed to buy time, maybe relieve pressure from the Trump administration, which wants a quick end to the conflict, seems less about a genuine, immediate pursuit of a comprehensive peace deal right now, more about managing external expectations than changing battlefield realities.
And it seems like some cracks might be appearing in the media narrative around Ukraine's internal situation, specifically mobilization efforts. What questions are being raised?
Absolutely. Even outlets usually seen as supportive, like Deutsch is described by sources as a German propaganda outlet, are now asking pointed questions like, why is Ukraine mobilizing mentally ill people, older people, unquote. This comes after other outlets, like the Financial Times, published critical reports, one called Zelensky an authoritarian dictator. The Spectator used the nickname the Green Goblin for him. These questions about the nature, the scope of Ukraine's mobilization, they highlight growing concerns about human rights, resource management. Even among previous allies, sympathetic media signals a shift in how the conflict's internal dynamics are being seen, reported internationally.
Turning to the front lines, what's the latest from Bakhmut, or Pokrovsk as it's becoming known, the strategic situation there?
The update indicates Pokrovsk is almost encircled, or very close to encirclement, according to sources, expected to be an incredibly tough fight. Similar intensity duration to the long battle for Avdiivka, could last a couple of months. Projection based on the Ukrainian military being very deeply dug in, extensive defenses, plus they've sent significant reinforcements, shows its strategic value. Pokrovsk is a critical logistics hub for Ukrainian forces in the east, Donbas. Sources stress its eventual capture by Russia would be a significant defeat for Ukraine, could disrupt supply lines, open new paths for Russian advances west.
That's a lot happening in the conflict zone. Okay, let's pivot now to some major revelations shaking up U.S. politics, specifically around what's known as Russiagate. Tulsi Gabbard, based on declassified documents, has asserted some truly startling things, stuff that aligns with long-held suspicions for some folks.
Indeed. According to Gabbard's July 19th revelations, drawing on these declassified docs, she alleges the Obama White House actively manufactured intelligence to construct the entire Russia narrative before the 2016 election. Her sources indicate this was supposedly done under Obama's direct orders, unquote. The declassified documents, as reported, apparently show senior intelligence analysts had initially assessed that Russia doesn't have the tools, the capability, or the intent to try to change the outcome of the U.S. presidential election, unquote, and that Russian actions had not impacted recent U.S. election results. Crucially, this intelligence, which contradicted the narrative being built, was reportedly suppressed, suggests a deliberate effort to shape perception, political action.
So not just a mistake or misinterpretation. According to these claims, an intentional suppression of intelligence that ran counter to a politically useful narrative.
Precisely. The documents, as Gabbard's findings summarize them, allegedly detail how figures like Brennan, Clapper, Rice, Lynch, McCabe were involved in scheming to derail Trump's presidency and strategically painting Russia as the enemy, justifying actions against the incoming administration central to this alleged scheme. A December 2016 Oval Office meeting chaired by President Obama, Vice President Biden also present. This meeting is being flagged by some analysis as potentially the most important meeting in the whole scandal. Raises that classic Watergate question. What did the president know and when did he know it? FBI figures like Peter Strzok, Deputy Director McCabe, are specifically implicated in this planning meeting for what sources call operatives and enforcers who'd push the Russia narrative.
And how do the big investigations that followed Mueller's Durham's fit into this picture, especially with these new claims about suppressed intel?
They're viewed very critically by these sources, particularly now. The Mueller inquiry, described as a performance intended to destroy Donald Trump, one that, according to some analysis, barely ran his own inquiry, and ultimately found no evidence at all of any collusion with Russia. As for Durham's investigation and Ratcliffe's time at DNI, it now looks like a cover-up, according to these claims, seemingly deliberately avoided finding key info, the conclusion drawn by these sources. Those involved knew the documents detailing the alleged manufacturing of intel were there, but deliberately did not want to find those documents or publish those documents, suggests a concerted effort to keep the truth hidden.
And the infamous Steele dossier.
Yeah.
How is that wrapped up in all this, as sources put it, given how widely it spread and was later debunked?
The discredited Steele dossier played a huge controversial role. Sources highlight that people inside the intelligence community had warned internally it was a complete mess, explicitly made up from unreliable info. Yet these warnings were reportedly ignored. The dossier, despite internal knowledge of its shaky basis, got referenced in an annex of an intelligence assessment shown to President-elect Trump by Comey, and then subsequently leaked to the media, created a massive public firestorm, fueled the Russiagate narrative, even though, according to these claims, its foundation was known to be flimsy.
This sounds like a deeply unsettling alleged manipulation of intelligence for political aims. What are the broader implications of Russiagate, especially its potential link to the current Ukraine conflict?
Sources assert the Russiagate narrative massively poisoned U.S.-Russia relations on what they call a completely forced basis, created an adversarial climate. With these newly highlighted documents now, allegedly confirming Russia's non-interference in 2016, Putin's earlier claims to Trump in Helsinki Trump got slaughtered in the media for seeming to accept them are, remarkably, seen as vindicated, truthful by this analysis. The consensus among some analysis we're seeing is that the Ukraine war would not have happened had there not been a Russiagate, end quote. Arguing this manufactured narrative was used to justify escalating sanctions, even political interventions like alleged election cancellations in places like Romania. The original plan, suggested by these sources, was for Hillary Clinton to win in 2016 and immediately hit Russia with devastating sanctions, a plan reportedly thwarted by Trump's win. The subsequent escalation, continuing the Russia narrative, according to this view, aimed to derail Trump's presidency, derail any rapprochement with Russia, and continue the project of regime change against Russia. Exemplified by the Katsa Act in 2017 imposing strict sanctions, suggests a direct causal link. Alleged Russiagate fabrication, geopolitical tensions, or current conflict.
Given these potential bombshells, serious allegations of deep misconduct, what about accountability? Calls for prosecution, where does that stand?
Strong public political calls for accountability, prosecution. Tulsi Gabbard officially filed documents with the DOJ. Russiagate, in the analysis of these sources, is the original sin of the deep state, what they call a real insurrection. Unelected officials allegedly subverting democracy by putting out outright lies and colluding with the media to undermine a presidency. The frustration over the DOJ's awful quiet after this bombshell info is palpable among these sources. Explicit calls for perp walks for implicated officials. Sources draw parallels to historical alleged government weaponization against political opponents, Hillary's emails, Lois Lerner's FBI school board parents. Note the irony of some factions being unable or unwilling to prosecute alleged wrongdoings when in power. DNI Tulsi Gabbard's unique position is highlighted. She can use ODNI power to demand documents from other intel agencies, seen by supporters as fighting the deep state. Segment also references Chairman Chuck Grassley's revelations about AG Loretta Lynch allegedly meeting with the Clinton campaign to protect her. Sources liken it to President Johnson-level corruption, J. Edgar Hoover sort of stuff. Shows the perceived severity. The question of actual prosecution, still a big, open one.
Okay, quick U.S. domestic update now. Unrelated to all that political drama. S2 Underground is reporting an IT outage caused some big disruptions. What happened there?
That's right. Sunday evening, July 20th, Alaska Airlines had a widespread IT outage, grounded all their aircraft for several hours. Critical system failure led to about 150 flight cancellations. Big impact on travelers. Airline reps have since warned about potential future disruptions due to malfunctioning equipment, though no specific cause beyond unspecified equipment failure has been revealed publicly. Stark reminder of how interconnected, sometimes fragile, our modern tech systems are, even for critical stuff like air travel.
Indeed. And speaking of domestic issues, let's turn to this curious case involving a U.S. Congressman, Corey Mills, highlighted by a Blaze News investigation. Seems he has a pattern of being, let's say, fast and loose with the truth.
That's exactly what the Blaze News investigation details. A pattern of behavior sources call alarming, deeply inconsistent for a public official. Starts with his marriage, faith, under significant scrutiny. Congressman Mills publicly denied reports he was married at a Virginia mosque by a radical Islamic cleric, called them false and misleading. However, a marriage certificate reportedly exists, shows he was married by Muhammad al-Ghali, identified by sources as an unindicted co-conspirator in the First World Trade Center bombing, known for raising money for radical Muslims. Stark contradiction.
That is a pretty serious contradiction. What about his broader religious claims, how they line up?
His religious identity is definitely questioned by the investigation. He claims Christian, even Catholic, in a 2022 article, yet launched his campaign from a Word of Faith pastor's home in 2021, an evangelical tradition. Plus, 5 individuals reportedly claim he converted to Muslim, the very Word of Faith pastors he claimed as spiritual advisors. They deny it, say he only attended their church twice in 4 years. Most recently, February 2024, shows deep inconsistency in his public faith narrative, raises questions about authenticity, transparency.
And it doesn't stop there, does it? His military and academic claims, often central to a politician's image, also disputed by the investigation.
Yes. Discrepancies extend to his professional background. For instance, he publicly claimed to be an Army Ranger, even suggested part of a top-secret classified regiment, but DynCorp colleagues confirmed no Rangers at his first station. At his second, they say he couldn't answer basic Ranger language questions, suggests unfamiliarity. One Ranger veteran allegedly threatened to beat your ass if he kept claiming it, shows how seriously it was viewed. He also stated he was blown up twice in Iraq by IEDs, but those who served with him say he was only there for the first incident. His vehicle was around the corner for the second. He later admitted to a reporter he only got a concussion in the first one, wasn't in the second. Described it as just bouncing off of a window. Led to a medic putting him off duty for just 24 hours. Significant downplaying of earlier claims portraying extensive combat experience.
So a significant exaggeration at best of his combat experience.
No.
What about the sniper claims and his academic credentials?
Also claimed to be a sniper. But DynCorp personnel reportedly realized quickly he wasn't. Allegedly lied his way into a course needing sniper credentials. Then left DynCorp when proof was requested. Reportedly lacked knowledge of the special language unique to snipers. Furthermore, academic credentials questioned. Wikipedia, other sites claim a Master of Arts from American Military University. But an email from the university, obtained by the investigation, states unequivocally they never conferred upon him a master's degree. His own LinkedIn page only says master's candidate. This pattern across military academic claims points to consistent embellishment of his background.
It certainly sounds like a consistent pattern of misrepresentation across different parts of his life. And then there's the issue of what the investigation calls manipulative Instagram posts.
Indeed. Blaze News highlights a specific instance, April 26th. Congressman Mills posted Instagram photos from a Syria trip earlier in 2025, but he included photos of himself with Donald Trump and Susie Wiles, Trump's chief of staff, that were actually taken way earlier, August 12, 2023, at the Iowa State Fair. This, according to the investigation, was a clear attempt to conflate this into being an official trip on behalf of our government. Imply he was traveling with the former president, an act Blaze News calls absolutely ridiculous in its deception. The organization he traveled with to Syria, Syrian Alliance for America and Peace and Prosperity, also has what sources describe as questionable membership, adds another layer of concern.
And finally, that very public saga about unpaid rent for his place. What did the investigation reveal there?
Yes. He faced eviction from his luxury D.C. penthouse. Rent, $21,000 a month, owed $85,000. While he publicly claimed he was paid in full, the investigation shows this was part of a pattern of behavior. Included 17 late payments, thousands in late fees. Indicates consistent disregard for payment terms. His excuse: the website wasn't working, he was repeatedly asking for payment links, debunked by the investigation. Landlords, the report explains, deliberately cut off tenant access to payment portals during eviction proceedings, specifically to prevent partial payments resetting the eviction clock. The court filing for eviction, published by Roger Sullenberger, was factual, not political, despite Mills calling Sullenberger a hack, suggests trying to dismiss legitimate reporting.
What's concerning isn't just one incident, right? It's the sheer volume, the variety of these instances, builds a consistent picture.
Exactly. These instances, even seemingly minor ones like the rent, combine to form what sources call a pattern of behavior that's alarming and goes a lot deeper than not paying rent. Highlights a consistent tendency towards misrepresentation, disregard for factual accuracy. The investigation stresses the critical importance of holding politicians accountable for repeated lies, deceptions, especially given the crucial period the country's navigating, where public trust is paramount. Suggests such a pattern raises fundamental questions about a leader's integrity, fitness for office.
And there you have it. In this deep dive, we've navigated some pretty complex information, haven't we? Distilling critical, impactful knowledge from our sources, ensuring you're truly well-informed across global economics, ongoing conflicts, and significant domestic issues.
You know, in a world where patterns of alleged misdirection, hidden agendas seem increasingly evident, a provocative question comes up for all of us as informed citizens. How do we truly discern fact from fabrication? Especially when information is presented with such conviction, what personal responsibility do we bear in actively seeking the genuine signal amidst all the overwhelming noise of information, and in demanding accountability from those in power and the sources they rely on?
We encourage you to like this deep dive, subscribe for more daily insights, and if you find value in what we do, please consider supporting us. You can donate on our GoFundMe page.
Thank you for joining us on the Deep Dive.
Until next time.
Bye.
And Nick.